In this practice plan, we aim to improve the player's ability to receive shots that come high over the net. This high ball defense situation is important for beginner to intermediate players as deep and high bouncing moon balls are extremely common in early stages. We will improve the player's performance in this situation in three ways. One, by teaching the player to use the pivot split step, followed by a backward shuffle to the ball. Two, by helping the player to recognize incoming high balls as early as possible. And three, by giving the player an effective tactical target for the situation. If this practice is effective, we should see the player use the pivot and backward movement pattern when the ball comes high and deep, as well as move to a position allowing them to strike the ball between their knees and chest in future practices and matches. In this short court warm-up drill, the player and the coach begin at opposite service lines. The coach places a target on the center line around a foot in front of the service line. The coach feeds to or rallies with the player, hitting the ball high over the net and alternating between the player's forehand and backhand. The player should move to, then step into the ball and balance on their front foot while hitting. While aiming for the target, the player counts how many shots they can make inside the service box without missing. After the short court warm-up, the player is introduced to the practice situation. Ask the player to try to complete the situation statement. When the ball comes high, we want to defend by, so that both the coach and player move to opposite baselines. The coach feeds a high and deep ball, and the point is played out with the player counting how many shots they can make without missing. The coach should hit to the player's forehand and backhand. Give the player several attempts before progressing. After exploring the situation, ask the player the following questions and discuss their answers. Mark the center target as shown with cones or lines. Revisit the completed situation statement and introduce the tool, in this case the pivot and backward move, by showing the player the following video example. Ask the player the tool-specific discussion questions, then introduce the tool using the following progression. In this drill, the player begins on the baseline in the ready position with the coach standing at the service line. The coach points to the player's left or right side. The player should split and pivot in the air, landing facing toward the pointed side. The player repeats the previous exercise, now landing only on the front foot and then pushing with that foot so that their body moves toward the back fence. Next, the player adds the backward shuffle. The player now starts with a cone. The coach tosses the ball high and deep to the player, who uses the movement practiced previously to move to and catch the ball at an appropriate height. The coach should encourage the player to position their body to catch, allowing the ball to drop into the cone rather than reach for the ball by moving their arm. Next, the coach hand feeds high balls to the player, who attempts to hit to the center target. The coach then moves to the opposite baseline and racket feeds deep and high bouncing balls to the player's forehand and backhand sides. Next, the coach rallies with the player, mixing in high and deep balls. The player counts how many shots they can make in a row without missing. If their shots land in the deep center target, they receive 2 points toward their streak. Finally, the coach and player play points with serve and return, and with the coach mixing in deep and high bouncing balls. The player calls out back as soon as they realize that the incoming ball will be high and deep. If the player makes X number of shots in a row, they win the point, regardless of the actual outcome. Continue to watch for and reinforce the pivot and backward move when receiving high and deep shots in future practices and matches. Look to see if the player is recognizing the height of the incoming ball and moving to a position allowing them to make contact at an appropriate height. Ask the player to consider in what other situations they would want to hit the ball back high and deep to the center of the court.